Hello, you're watching The Daily Dose with me, Eylon Levy. Brace yourselves for the stormy weather outside and the big stories making waves around the world. Reports Hamas makes Fatah a dramatic offer. We'll give the PLO our weapons, but first we want to join. The United States calls a meeting of the UN Security Council after more than a week of anti-regime protests in Iran.
Any words about Steve Bannon?
I don't know, he called me a great man last night.
And an explosive tell-all book about the Trump White House brings breathtaking revelations from the inside of a chaotic administration. Here in the studio, we have journalist and Middle East researcher Dr. Jonathan Spire. But first, some news. Islamist terror group Hamas has reportedly offered to transfer its weapons to the PLO in exchange for a foothold in the organization. Fatah and Hamas are negotiating a reconciliation deal for the Fatah-controlled Palestinian Authority to take back control of the Gaza Strip. But one long-standing obstacle has been Hamas's control of its own independent militia. Now, pan-Arab paper Al Hayat reports Hamas is willing to give its weapons to the PLO, the umbrella movement of Palestinian factions, but first it wants to join as a full member. Mustafa Barghouti, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, thank you very much for joining us. You're a member of the PLO Executive Committee, so please shed some light for us. Is it true, are the reports true, that Hamas has offered to give its weapons to the PLO in exchange for membership?
I'm not sure about how exact these reports are. We will check that. But in principle, I think the idea is quite good, because we are talking here about a unified Palestinian leadership. A unified Palestinian leadership will be in charge, including all the Palestinian groups, will be in charge of deciding all political matters and all forms of struggle. And that has been the basis of the ongoing negotiations for the possible complete unity between Palestinians. But there is another very positive sign, which is the possibility that Hamas and Jihad would join the meeting of the Central Council of the PLO for the first time. And if that happens, this will help probably Palestinians come up with a unified decision and unified strategy in response to President Trump's declaration and in response to the Israeli actions of settlement activities and annexation that Israel is doing.
Dr. Barghouti, clarify something for me, please. Are we talking about Hamas giving up its weapons to the PLO and then joining the voting bodies, or are we talking about Hamas joining a unified command structure, keeping the militias intact, holding its own weapons, just transferring formal command over its forces?
I don't know about any of these details, but I know one thing, that you cannot ask Palestinians to dismantle their weapons in Gaza, which are used to defend themselves in front of Israeli attacks, unless occupation is over.
So sorry, I just want to understand. I just want to understand if you're talking about bringing the Palestinian movements together. I just want to understand what you see being the fate of these weapons in Gaza. If you're saying actually they shouldn't be dismantled, are they going to remain under the command of the same Hamas commanders in the Gaza Strip right now?
I think I am for dismantling all weapons. So if we could dismantle the Israeli weapons and Palestinian weapons at the same time and bring international troops to stand on the borders and end Israeli occupation, this would be wonderful. This would be an area that has no weapons whatsoever. But you see, Israel wants to have nuclear heads, wants to have an army. It has attacked Gaza already 3 times, killing more than 5,000 people. And they want Palestinians not to be able to defend themselves with anything, including popular nonviolent demonstrations. The Israeli army has been shooting Palestinian children during the last week in a horrible manner. And I think what Israel wants us even is not to defend ourselves verbally. Even when we speak, trying to demand our freedom, they accuse us of incitement.
Okay, so Dr. Barghouti, so in short, you'd prefer that Gaza and Israel both be demilitarized, but in the absence of that, you don't want Hamas to break apart its weapons. Dr. Barghouti, thank you for joining us. We're taking a short break. We'll be back in just a minute.
Unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights, David Schuster and Shayna Estulin bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Esta semana en News 24, Irán se sacude, miles de manifestantes piden un cambio. La imagen de Israel en el mundo, entre realidad y fantasía. Brasil, aumentan los fieles de la iglesia evangélica. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de I-24 News.
Welcome back to Daily Dose. Iranian lawmakers visited Syria this week to discuss expanding strategic relations between the two countries. Lawmaker Ahmed Saleh accused the United States of occupying Syrian territory. Iran has been the main backer of the Assad regime in Syria, helping it defeat US-backed rebel forces and reassert control over the country. Dr. Jonathan Spy, you were also in Syria recently and, according to reports, managed to single-handedly bring down a Syrian government minister. Tell us about that adventure.
Oh, well, this was I've made many trips, Eylon, to Syria in the course of the civil war of the last 5 years, and this was the most recent one, which was actually in April of last year, of 2017. And the method which I was able to use to enter government-controlled Syria, not an easy thing to do, of course, was to join a delegation, actually of Assad supporters, of which I would wish to hasten to add I'm not one, but this was the only way I could do it to get in. And the delegation was organised by the ministry.
Just to clarify, how do you get into Syria? Are you travelling on your presumably British passport?
That's correct, yeah. I was British-born, I have a British passport, so that's how I travelled. And the delegation was organised by what they call the Ministry of Information there in Syria, and the minister,
the propaganda ministry.
Yeah, and the minister was Mr. Mohammad Turjiman. So when it became apparent after I returned from the trip and began to write articles in the Western media about it, who I was and who I'd really been, there was a certain degree of anger, and the minister, as the person officially in charge of the delegation, was held responsible for that failure, the failure to have intercepted me and known who I really was in real time.
I mean, Jonathan, this is staggering incompetence on the part of the Syrian authorities to allow an Israeli to get all the way into the heart of Damascus and meet a Syrian government minister. I mean, presumably you must have expected that they'd be on to you at some point and you'd get caught.
Well, I didn't expect that, and I was, of course, hoping very much that I wouldn't get caught, and that was my assumption. As it turned out, I was right. I have to say, you know, in the inquiries made by hunters, when a hunter's gone wrong, it's not customary to ask the opinion of the fox, so to speak. Nevertheless, I'll give my opinion anyway. It would seem to me that the bodies responsible for the failure were probably not actually the Ministry of Information. I doubt it's the Ministry of Information that examines visa applications by foreign journalists, and I would suspect that the real failure, and indeed certainly failure it was from the Syrian regime's point of view, is located elsewhere other than on the head of Mohammad Turjiman. But it appears, at least if the Al Arabiya story is accurate, that he's the person who's being held as the figurehead and being made to pay the price for what took place.
Well, after 7 years of civil war, one can hardly expect the country's bureaucracy to be working exactly tickety-boo. Jonathan Spy, stay with us 1 second. We've put our man on top. That's what President Trump is reported to have said when Saudi Arabia's King Salman ousted the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef and replaced him with 31-year-old Mohammed bin Salman. The ouster came just after Trump's first overseas trip to Saudi Arabia. Jonathan, this extraordinary statement that Trump is reported to have said comes in this new explosive book, Fire and Fury. We put our man on top. I mean, President Trump also took credit this week for reducing deaths in civil aviation accidents in the United States. Is this another Trump boast, or has the United States had some hand in reorganizing the Saudi royal court?
Look, what happens behind the scenes in the Saudi royal court, of course, I'm afraid is not quite within my purview. But what we can say with certainty, or with greater confidence, is that Mohammed bin Salman and I would say also his parallel figure in a way, Mohammed bin Zayed in United Arab Emirates, are certainly people who are very well regarded by the Trump White House, who themselves regard very highly the administration and its agenda, and who certainly were very excited, I think, by Trump's speech in Riyadh, by his decision to go to Riyadh as one of his first trips abroad after being elected. So there's certainly a synergy there between what Mohammed bin Salman is trying to do, his very far-reaching reform program within Saudi Arabia, and his very far-reaching desire to roll back Iranian influence in the region. There's certainly a synergy between that agenda and the agenda of a lot of the very serious people around Trump, such as H.R. McMaster, Defense Secretary Mattis, and others. So what we can say, sort of from looking from the outside, so to speak, of the intrigues of the Saudi royal court, is there's a great deal of common agenda right now between the Trump administration and the up-and-coming people in both Saudi Arabia and in United Arab Emirates, and that's certainly going to be very important, I think, for the region in the years ahead.
So saying our man, not necessarily untrue, but we put him there might perhaps be. Jonathan Spy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Eylon.
The leaders of France and Turkey are set to meet in just a short time in Paris. High on the agenda is Syria, as France prepares to push for peace talks involving all parties in nearly 7-year Syrian civil war. It's the first time that Turkish strongman Recep Tayyip Erdogan will be meeting France's young president Emmanuel Macron face to face. And our French diplomatic correspondent Christian Mallard joins us now from Paris, from the Élysée Palace. Christian Mallard, thank you very much for joining us. On the agenda, Syria, what does President Macron want to tell Erdogan, and what does Erdogan want to get out of this visit?
Well, it's clear that French President Macron will hold the same language as the one he held 2 days ago with Iranian President Rouhani, saying definitely he will go straight to the point, telling Erdogan, you have to respect fundamental liberties, you have to respect freedom of expression in your own country. And definitely Mr. Macron doesn't want to cut the ties with Turkey and with Erdogan, because he considers that Erdogan is a partner in the problems we have to solve concerning migration and also the struggle against jihadism, terrorism in the area. And definitely Erdogan plays the Macron's card. I tell you why. I think he wants to create a rift between Macron and Merkel. Don't forget that Angela Merkel last September probably was on the verge of deciding that we should stop, that the European Union should stop the negotiations with Turkey about a possible entry of Turkey in the European Union. It did not happen. But he plays the card of Macron, hoping that Macron, who is pragmatist, who is playing real politics, will listen to him and try to help him to get this entry inside the European Union, which might be very difficult. So Macron will be talking about that, about Syria, and Erdogan might be a problem about Syria, as he doesn't want Bashar al-Assad to stay in the negotiations. So we will see what happens. They will talk about all that and also about the status of Jerusalem, which they agree upon and are not on the same wavelengths as with Donald Trump. Definitely.
Okay, Christian Mallard at the Élysée Palace, thank you very much for joining us. Jonathan, let's bring you back into the conversation on the question of Syria. The Assad regime has all but won the nearly 7-year civil war now in Syria. We heard that Erdogan isn't terribly happy about Assad being there at the negotiating table. Do France and Turkey see eye to eye on the question of Syria?
Well, the issue is that Erdogan and Turkey's position has shifted quite significantly in the course of the war. So it depends on which version of the Turkish position you want to focus on. The fact is that Erdogan was among the most vociferous and active backers of the largely Sunni Arab and, in fact, largely Sunni Islamist rebellion for a long period of time, but that in recent months he has shifted sides. The main problem Erdogan sees is the growth of Kurdish power in northern Syria. Once the Russians from September 2015 were inside Syria, the only way Erdogan could get to try to sort of turn back the Kurdish advance was by dealing with Russia. And by dealing with Russia, he also began tacitly to accept the continuation of Assad's rule. Turkish soldiers entered Syria with Russian permission at the end of last year to surround the Kurdish enclave in Afrin. But in recent days...
A NATO country, we should stress.
Yeah, and in recent days, nevertheless, Erdogan has once again referred to Assad as a terrorist. So Erdogan has been moving around quite a bit, and it's quite difficult to pin him down. France has been consistent. Macron is opposed to Assad. France has been opposed to the government side all the way through the civil war.
OK, Jonathan Spy, thank you very much for analysis. We're taking a short break now, but still to come. Thousands of Iranians continue to push for change, but the regime is fighting back. And the White House is stunned at the latest revelations in a controversial new president about Donald Trump.
Our world is becoming increasingly connected. 6.5 million Wi-Fi enabled devices are now shipping every day, and global consumer internet traffic is growing exponentially. We are creating breakthrough technologies that connect millions of people and billions of devices. And as we collaborate with the world's leading service and content providers, we're transforming the way billions of people connect to their digital world, securing our place as the most trusted business in technology. We are Eris, and we're powering your digital world.
Go beyond the headlines every day on I-24 News. Host Ami Kaufman talks to the news makers and pundits to bring you the story behind the headlines. The Spin Room with Ami Kaufman, Sunday to Thursday at 8:05 p.m. Eastern.
I-24 News.
The trends, the fads, the breakthroughs. Get it all on Trending. From food, music, and art to advances in modern medicine. Meet the trendsetters and the tech giants who make it all happen on Trending with Emily Francis. Weekdays beginning at 8 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Tracy Alexander for I-24 News. Join us on Perspectives and get the whole picture as we break down the day's top stories from all angles.
Welcome back to the Daily Dose. The UN Security Council will meet in just a few hours to discuss the wave of protests engulfing Iran. Iranians took to the streets to protest economic hardship, but many are now calling for the downfall of the Islamic Republic itself. At least 21 people have been killed and hundreds arrested. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is accusing the country's enemies of being behind the unrest. US Ambassador at the UN, Nikki Haley, said the world mustn't allow Iran to experience the same horrors as Syria, which started off denying the right to peaceful protest. Iranian journalist Camelia Entekhabifar joins us now from Dubai. Camelia, thanks for joining us. The European Union says it's watching the situation, demanding Iran respect the right for peaceful protest. Why is it so difficult for many in the international community to express solidarity with the people fighting for their civil rights against an autocratic theocracy?
Thanks for hosting me. Simply, they have some financial benefit in Iran, the European allies. Second, they have feared Iran break up the nuclear deal and the whole nation then enter to a nuclear weapon race if Iran wants to pursue the nuclear weapon. And thirdly, they have fears which the crackdown of the operation become more sincere and severe if the European Union wants to interfere and having an impact. But I would like to mention which President Trump these days, according of my sources in Iran, become very popular, not because he likes to break up the nuclear deal, because he has been standing with the Iranian people against of the oppressive regime. And today, the UN Security Council meeting, which it has been asked by the United States, and from the 9 members of the 15, it showed the world is caring for the Iranian, and it's not just the United States.
Camelia Entekhabifar, unfortunately, we're having some technical problems with the Skype, but thank you very much for your analysis. The United States is suspending nearly all security aid to Pakistan, claiming the country is playing a double game in the fight against terrorism. The Trump administration could slash up to $1.3 billion in annual aid till Pakistan changes course It says Pakistan is harboring terrorists and failing to confront extremists who threaten the United States. The Pentagon worries that Islamabad might retaliate to this decision by closing U.S. supply routes to Afghanistan. But the State Department insists aid will remain frozen till Pakistan takes decisive action.
We are suspending security assistance only to Pakistan at this time, until the Pakistani government takes decisive action against groups, including the Afghan Taliban and the Haqqani network. We consider them to be destabilizing the region and also targeting U.S. personnel.
Islamist terror groups Hamas and Islamic State used to be uneasy allies. ISIS jihadists in the Sinai Desert helped Hamas smuggle weapons into the Gaza Strip, receiving cash and kickbacks in return. But now Islamic State has turned on Hamas with a gruesome video showing the execution of a Hamas fighter in the Sinai. Marcus White has more.
This is an image from a new video from ISIS. It shows the Islamic State shooting a man in the back of the head and killing him. The man allegedly smuggled weapons to Hamas. According to the site Intelligence Group, which monitors terror websites, a man with a knife who narrated the video tells ISIS sympathizers to assault Hamas, saying, "Never surrender to them. Use explosives, silence pistols and sticky bombs. Bomb their courts and their security locations, for these are the pillars of tyranny that prop up its throne." In the video, ISIS says Hamas's crackdown is the reason they created the execution video. The video also cites Hamas's failure to prevent the United States from recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital as another reason for making the video. It starts with a clip from President Trump's announcement declaring Jerusalem as Israel's capital last month. Tensions between Hamas and ISIS have been escalating in recent years. In 2015, Hamas led an effort to crack down on supporters of ISIS in Gaza after they took credit for several bombings in the Strip. Most recently, Hamas has ramped up its efforts to counter ISIS and its supporters, especially along the border between Gaza and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, in an attempt to repair relations with Cairo. ISIS's presence in Egypt has increased since 2013. In November, the terror group killed more than 300 people in a mosque in Ismailia. As for the brutal video released on this day, this isn't the first time ISIS has released a video showing an execution. The terror group has killed several Americans using this method, and in late 2016, the militant group released what may have been one of its most graphic videos showing the execution of 2 Turkish soldiers. And in May of last year, ISIS released a video showing the beheading of 19 Kurdish dissidents. Marcus White, I-24 News.
Israel is normally a fairly good destination for winter sun, but as you can see behind me, Israel too has its wintry days, and today is experiencing the worst storm on this season's record. Joining us from outside is our defense correspondent, Daniel Semach, who is battling against the wind and the waves. Daniel, I'm inside safe and fairly warm. What are the conditions like outdoors?
Well, Eylon, just a few weeks ago, there were thousands that gathered at the Western Wall in the Old City of Jerusalem to pray for rain because of this prolonged drought. Well, you can't see it now, but the rain has been pouring down throughout the entire country. From the northernmost city of Metula down to the desert city of Eilat, there has been flooding throughout the north. Winds are expected to reach over 60 miles per hour in some places. All security services and emergency networks are on high alert, including the IDF. Rescue teams are in place. There was already a couple of instances where people, unfortunately, were stranded in the rain. Cars that arrived in huge puddles. There were actually 2 children that had to be rescued by security services, by emergency services, and also IDF rescue teams using helicopters. They're also on high alert and at the ready. We're expecting waves that are reaching around over 26 feet in the city of Tel Aviv.
Okay, we're taking a short break. We'll be back in just a minute.
News 24 is a Spanish-language weekly news magazine on I-24 News, presented by respected journalists Carlos Gurovich and Damian Pachter, bringing you news and analysis of the most important issues of the Middle East and Israel, with the added perspective of the impact on the Spanish-speaking world. News 24, Fridays only on I-24 News.
Michelle McCory on I-24 News. Join me on Clear Cut, where we cut to the chase with a straightforward yet insightful breakdown of the world's top political and economic stories.
Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Daily Dose. Bookstores in Washington, D.C. opened past midnight on Thursday night for the early release of an explosive new book on the Trump presidency. Fire and Fury is a tell-all account of the first year of the Trump administration by a journalist given unprecedented access behind the scenes. It was published early after Trump's lawyers demanded that the publishers halt publication. The book claims that Trump never wanted to be president, and his closest advisors thought he probably shouldn't be president either. More in this report.
In the White House today, we asked President Trump about his old friend Steve Bannon.
Did Steve Bannon betray you, Mr. President?
Thank you.
Any words about Steve Bannon?
I don't know. He called me a great man last night, so, you know, he obviously changed his tune pretty quick. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you. I don't talk to him. I don't talk to him. That's just a misnomer. Thank you.
In the past 24 hours, the president's former chief strategist did indeed take to the airwaves, lavishing praise on his old boss multiple times.
The president of the United States is a great man. You know, I support him day in and day out.
But the damage may already be done after that new White House book, Fire and Fury, quoted Bannon attacking the president and his children. He called Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner treasonous and unpatriotic for the meeting in Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer they thought had dirt on Hillary Clinton. And he said of daughter Ivanka Trump, people suddenly realized she's dumb as a brick. Author Michael Wolff writes Ivanka and her husband even talked about her possibly running for president one day. Bannon scoffed at the prospect. From the White House, outrage.
There are numerous mistakes, but I'm not going to waste my time or the country's time going page by page talking about a book that's complete fantasy and just full of tabloid gossip.
And the president's legal team waged war, threatening to sue Bannon for libel and slander, writing legal action is imminent. They also demanded the book's publisher halt publication. The threat didn't seem to matter much. The release date moved up to tomorrow. The shockwaves already felt in Washington with early excerpts like this. Wolff says behind closed doors, President Trump critiqued top aides, calling his son-in-law a suck-up, senior advisor Kellyanne Conway a crybaby, and former press secretary Sean Spicer stupid. And it claims the president's advisors had concerns about his mental stability. Wolff doesn't name names, but he writes the worry among staffers, Trump's rambling and his alarming repetitions had significantly increased, and that his ability to stay focused, never great, had notably declined. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders today forced to defend the president's fitness to serve.
It's disgraceful and laughable. If he was unfit, he probably wouldn't be sitting there.
From an explosive book to an explosive peninsula, North and South Korea will meet for official talks as the nuclear crisis on the peninsula heats up. These will be the first high-level talks in 2 years. North Korea accepted the invitation from South Korea by fax. They'll meet on the 9th of January in the demilitarized zone between the two countries. On the agenda, the participation of North Korean athletes in February's Olympic Winter Games in South Korea. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in says he sees the Games as a groundbreaking chance to improve relations with Pyongyang.
North Korea goes through phases of apparent dialogue and provocation, but either way, North Korea is continuing its nuclear and missile development. We have no intention of weakening our warning and surveillance activity.
When young Israelis finish their compulsory military service, many travel the world, and instead of fighting terrorists, they find themselves fighting ignorance about their country. One workshop helps discharged Israeli soldiers explain Israel to the curious and to the clueless. Shai Ben-Ari reports.
Oh, there's scuba diving, there's lots of sports. That's good, I love to run.
This may look like your typical drama class, but that would be an inaccurate description. It's a workshop being run by a program called Israel Is. which trains recently discharged Israeli soldiers for interactions with foreigners during their travels abroad. Neil Lazarus is a communications consultant who has worked with the Israeli Foreign Ministry.
Where do you live?
In Rishon, near Tel Aviv.
Near Tel Aviv?
Yeah.
So is Tel Aviv like, is dangerous? Or is it just like a desert?
No, just the city.
It's a city? Yeah. You have cities in Israel?
Yeah. These conversations might seem a bit strange to the casual observer, but for many Israelis, there's a familiar ring to them. Drills like this are meant to help participants understand what works and what doesn't.
So Israel's only Jewish?
It's Jewish, yes.
But hold on, I don't understand. So there's no non-Jews living in Israel?
There are also.
But that's not for them?
But
so it's a bit like South Africa for whites?
No.
I'm so confused.
No, it's...
If you can show, on the one hand, the dilemmas and the choices that we have, I think that that's a very effective tool. Second of all, to show the person behind the uniform.
The workshop also makes use of professional actors who help make these scenarios seem as real as possible.
Are you really from Israel? Don't look Israeli.
Thank you. How does Israel look like?
This is so horrible what you do. You're doing for 60 years horrible things. So you're going to educate a lot of generation about the horrible things that you're going to do. This is horrible. But you're a nation of murderers. So I don't know if I need to listen to you.
I look like a murderer to you?
Did you feel like you were really in the situation?
Yes, because it can happen to me. And I don't know, I'm a girl alone. I can meet someone in a bar or somewhere, and he can be nice, and he can be not nice.
Role-playing for real life. Shai Ben-Ari, I-24 News.
Okay, we want to bring you some live images now from Paris, from the Élysée Palace, where Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is meeting French President Emmanuel Macron. It is the first time that the Turkish strongman is meeting his French counterpart. High on the agenda is Syria. France hoping to host all-party talks to end the Syrian civil war, bring all parties round the table. There we have it, a historic handshake in the forecourt of the Élysée Palace. We're expecting a press conference later at 3:45 Israel time, and we will bring that live here on I-24 News. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu locked horns with the security services over whether his own children should get their own personal bodyguards. Yair and Avner Netanyahu, both in their 20s, are the first Prime Minister's children in the country's history to get round-the-clock personal protection. Now, a former head of the Shin Bet Internal Security Services reveals he recommended against giving Netanyahu's children publicly funded security guards. Netanyahu's office refuted the account, saying Shin Bet head Yoram Cohen had encouraged increased security for Netanyahu's two sons. Here in the studio, we have political analyst Amir Oren. Amir, help me understand what the big deal is here. The Prime Minister is presented with a recommendation that says his children don't need bodyguards, but at the end of the day, the Prime Minister is the elected decision-maker. The buck stops with him, and he says, actually, I see the situation rather differently. I don't accept the recommendation, and I think my children deserve bodyguards. What's the big deal?
The buck stops with him, but the Shabak does not.
Very clever.
The security service. Now, there's a combination of issues here. Ever since the Rabin assassination in November of 1995, there has been an acute awareness of security problems for elected officials. And therefore, there has been appointed a commission to decide who is going to be secured, who is going to get bodyguards around the clock. 7 people, including the Prime Minister, the President of the Supreme Court, the Speaker of the Knesset, and the opposition leader, are assigned bodyguards. As for families, there is no rule regarding it. The commission or another one appointed following it hears recommendations.
And the Prime Minister is deciding to err on the side of caution.
The Prime Minister has no say in it. The Prime Minister has not even a say on his own security. He must get the security detail even if he refuses it. The Prime Minister's family can give it up. Now, this commission...
So the problem here is what? He forced the security services to do something that's outside his authority?
No, the security service was not clear enough. What the former security service director is now saying is not what was said during the time. And the commission, where a certain public official, a retired one, Yossi Chichanover, was the head, and a minister, they decided for it.
Okay, Amir Oren, we have to go for a break. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back in just a second.
I'm David Schuster on I-24 News. Join us on Stateside. It's our channel's flagship broadcast, and it features our best reporting and analysis of news from around the world and from here in the United States.
Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Lauren Izzo on I-24 News. Join me on High Definition right here for an in-depth understanding of Israel's diverse society through groundbreaking documentaries.
Join Lauren Izzo weeknights at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Daily Dose. The sun is finally coming out after the worst storm of the winter here in Israel. Outside, we have our defense correspondent Daniel Tzemach, who has intrepidly ventured outside to inspect the damage. Daniel, what's the situation outdoors?
Yes, Eylon, well, like you said, it is a bit sunnier than it was before, but as you can see, the waves are still crashing on the barriers. The winds are still blowing very strongly, and we are definitely not past this storm. We might have just hit a slight lull in regards to the rain. It's expected that this storm is actually going to continue well into tomorrow, maybe even until tomorrow evening. But just to go through a few of the precautionary measures that were taken by the security forces here in Israel, both police and the military, there was actually a warning sent out to hikers in northern Israel specifically to stick to the hiking routes if they are brave and courageous enough to go out and hike, because minefields may have flooded and mines may have indeed flooded to other areas. This is just one interesting warning that was indeed sent out throughout the north in Israel. But here in the center, there have been already a few incidents of damage, trees falling here in Tel Aviv. In two major roads in Tel Aviv have been closed down. One had a huge hole that actually broke right in the middle of the pavement. So precautionary measures were taken, but as happens with these such storms, there was certainly damage, but security forces and units are definitely on the ready, everyone on high alert in order to deal with any situation that does indeed arrive. Eylon.
Okay, Daniel Tzemach, thank you very much. Do stay safe and dry and try not to get blown over the edge of the balcony there. Meanwhile, in America, the so-called bomb cyclone is wreaking havoc across the northeastern United States. 17 people are reported dead, nearly 5,000 flights cancelled. The worst could be yet to come. Temperatures expected to plunge even after the blizzard ends. Some parts of the United States could experience their lowest ever recorded temperatures. ABC's Elizabeth Herr has more.
The East Coast taking a beating from Mother Nature. The powerful nor'easter dumping up to 3 inches of snow an hour in the region. Some areas also hit with lightning, thunder, and even flooding. In Boston, fire trucks waded through floodwaters making rescues. In New York, mail trucks and buses were slipping and sliding. Driving conditions so treacherous, police kept busy pushing stranded drivers.
It's coming down so fast, you're not able to clear. So underneath, it's getting real icy. Plus, you got people that shouldn't be out here driving.
The slick conditions also wreaking havoc at airports.
We're not sure if we're going to be flying out of here anytime soon.
It's a mess. That's what I think.
Frustrations running high with more than 4,000 flights canceled across the country.
It's a nightmare.
The hardest hit, according to this misery map from FlightAware, D.C., Boston, and New York City, where LaGuardia and JFK airports first suspended, then shut down for most of the day.
While many Americans would be brave to step outside into the bomb cyclone, people in China are finding it easier to enjoy the outdoors. Beijing reports it has met its air quality targets, slashing pollution that has led to its famously filthy air. The city has taken major action, closing nearly 2,000 factories, shutting down coal-fired power plants and eliminating over 2 million high-emission vehicles over the past 5 years. Officials acknowledged that the drier and windier weather also helped. Not quite a trade war, but the United States and China are now competing to keep investors on board by dramatically cutting corporate taxes. The US Congress passed a bill slashing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, and now China will grant certain tax breaks to keep its competitive edge. Beijing will make it cheaper for Chinese companies to repatriate their overseas profits. Economy correspondent Asher Westrup-Evans joins us now. Asher, China and the United States are in a strategic rivalry, especially when it comes to business. How many other countries are getting dragged into this race to the bottom, as we say?
Look, Eylon, at the moment, the UK, Norway, France and Argentina have all made specific moves to try and entice these multinational organizations to come and be part of their organizations, be involved in their countries. However, this is part of a larger global trend which is seeing initiatives and incentives for companies to come move into different states from Morocco to Uganda, all around the world.
Now, Asher, look, companies are obviously going to welcome lower tax rates, but how effective is the reduction of the tax rate in actually encouraging companies to relocate from one country to the other? Because that's not an easy process.
No, and it's certainly not. And you've hit on something right there, Eylon. CEOs, while considering taxation as one important factor, also look at a myriad of other factors involved in what's needed to move. Things like political stability, geographic location tend to be far more important, or at least as important, factors as taxation itself. This can be seen in examples like Singapore and even Israel, where these sort of big hubs of technology and startup companies and involved companies where the taxation might not be the lowest, but there are enough other incentives to entice companies to come.
Okay, Asher Westrup-Evans, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In Texas, here's how a cell phone store employee stood up to an armed robber. It's surveillance video you have to see to believe.
When John Bell sauntered into the Latino cell store on April 17th, clerk Karina Leon knew immediately it was a robbery.
As soon as he entered, he just pointed the gun at me, and I knew instantly that I'm getting robbed again.
Having been robbed just weeks prior, Leon decided to jump into action. She rushed out the customers, then locked the door. Bell had nowhere to go. Over the next 6 minutes, Bell tries several tactics, including shooting at the door lock. Police say that method backfired.
What he did is he broke the lock on the inside. So when he found keys and tried to make his way out, he wasn't able to get out because of the fact that he messed the lock up.
Eventually, he resorted to begging.
at some point, I kind of did feel bad when I saw that he got on his knees and begged me.
But Leon was resolute, calling 911 and waiting for Houston police to arrive, arresting Bell, who at that point had all but given up.
I think once he finally realized that he was done, he just stood there and waited and put his hands up in the air.
It turns out Bell was no stranger to being in trouble. He was already on deferred adjudication for another case. But this time, he wasn't getting away. And the video even caused veteran officers to shake their head.
He scales to 10 for dumbest crooks out there, for sure.
Okay, we're taking a very short break. When we come back, Oscars season is officially on. We're going to take a look at the latest straight out from Hollywood as we begin the countdown towards the Academy Awards. We'll be back in just a minute. Don't go away.
I-24 News.
I'm Jordana Miller at I-24 News. Join me for the Holy Land Uncovered, a look at this remarkable land filled with so much faith and history and archaeology.
Watch Holy Land Uncovered every Sunday at 10:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm David Schuster.
And I'm Shayna Estulin.
Join us on I-24 News for our show Crossroads.
We bring you a comprehensive
and engaging
look at the global news and opinions from the crossroads of America.
Weeknights beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Daily Dose. Oscars season is officially on as Academy members start casting their votes. Here's what's hot in the world of Hollywood.
Oscar ballots go out to Academy Award voters today, but writers have already announced their nominees. Call Me By Your Name, Molly's Game, and Netflix's Mudbound are among those nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay by members of the WGA.
You in Mississippi now. You use the back door.
I'm just gonna call an Uber.
Your driver will be ready as soon as he puts on his pants.
The Big Sick, Lady Bird, and Get Out are up for Best Original Screenplay. The 2018 Writers Guild of America Awards will be handed out February 11th.
Wait.
Get Out is being recognized across the pond as well. Star Daniel Kaluuya is nominated for this year's BAFTA Rising Star Award.
So what do you do around here?
Read books. The London-born actor faces competition from 4 other actors, including Timothée Chalamet, who has won critical praise for his role in Call Me By Your Name. The winner, voted for by the public, will be announced on February 18th. 2018's movie award season barely underway, but planning is taking place for next year. The Cannes Film Festival organizers have announced that Australian actress Cate Blanchett will head their jury this year. The 48-year-old Blanchett, a campaigner against sexual harassment, said in a statement, "This festival plays a pivotal role in bringing the world together to celebrate story."
And for more on showbiz, we have Maya Margit, our culture correspondent. Maya, we've just heard Game of Thrones has been delayed. What's happening there? That's going to leave a lot of disappointed fans.
Very disappointed. Tens of millions of disappointed Game of Thrones fans. We're going to have to wait until 2019, and it's an undisclosed date, so it could be late in 2019 even, so even maybe a year and a half or more. And this is because they're working on the
Winter is coming, but it's dramatically delayed.
Dramatically delayed, unfortunately, you know, and people are going to have to wait. Their final 6 episodes they're working on, and each episode is going to be movie quality and length as we've expected from past seasons. Season 8, we have to wait to find out what happens to the world of Westeros, what happens to, you know, the dragons, Daenerys, Jon Snow, all our favorite characters. And that's because they're apparently also working on spin-off series for Game of Thrones because this series has done so well.
That's such a moneymaker.
it's HBO's most successful series ever. So they're working on spin-offs now because it's almost over, Game of Thrones. So we're going to have to, wait and see what happens with that.
Okay, so HBO's reaching the end of the line with Game of Thrones.
Right.
What else are they trying to produce to grab the viewers' attention?
So this is really interesting. It's called David Bowie, The Last 5 Years. It's a documentary film by British filmmaker Francis Whately. It's coming out on January 8th, so just in a few days. And it's a very much anticipated film that looks at the final 2 albums that David Bowie came out with in the last 5 years of his career, and also his battle with cancer, being sick. And some of his former bandmates speak out. He has interviews in the film with different people who knew David Bowie, who worked with him at the end, because at the end of his life, he was quite secretive with his creative process. So it's really about David Bowie's creative process, something very much to look forward to for David Bowie fans.
Okay, we have a clip here to watch.
He offered an alternative to people for generations to come.
I have a certain niche that I work in. A lot of it tends to be about alienation, being on the outside of things. So that tends to be where I feel more comfortable as a writer.
Okay, let's look at cinema now. We have a remake of Jumanji, the classic film where people jump into a board game, get transported into the board game. How's that changed for the 21st century?
So board games are not as much in fashion. Now it's all about video games in this latest movie, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. We have a clip from that film as well.
We have to work together. Oh! I think it's a staring contest. Who's good at staring and not blinking? I'm amazing at it.
Is that an Oscars contender or good for the box office?
We'll have to see. Maybe kids will find it entertaining. I certainly really liked the first film. It was, but that was with Robin Williams. I mean, it's sad. You can't have the same thing without Robin Williams, in my opinion. But people are really liking it. It's doing impressively well at the box office. $200 million domestically, just over 2 weeks, and it's toe-to-toe with Star Wars: The Last Jedi, which is saying something because Star Wars is a huge behemoth, in the film industry. And speaking of Star Wars: The Last Jedi, it's made over $1 billion across the world so far. It's become the second highest grossing film franchise of all time.
That's extraordinary. So what, it's overtaken Titanic now? It's
taken $8.5 billion globally, all the 9 Star Wars films together. And we have a clip from the latest film, which if some people have not seen, I highly recommend going and watching it.
Okay.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
Okay, culture correspondent Maya Margit, thank you very much for joining us. And finally, while North America is freezing over, China is hosting its annual International Ice and Snow Festival. The colourful event in Harbin features the world's largest ice and snow park. I'm Eylon Levy. You're watching The Daily Dose.